Hello, everyone. My name is Amni Khan. I'm an associate professor in the Law and Legal Studies Department at Carleton University, and I am incredibly honored to be having an interview with my colleague, Professor Chinnaiah Jangam, and with my colleague, Professor Rehana Hashmi. Let me introduce my colleagues first, and then we're going to get into the interview. Rehana Hashmi is a world-renowned and award-winning human rights defender from Pakistan. For over 25 years, Hashmi's activism has centered on the defense of human rights, especially for women. She became a development specialist in the district of Chitral, which involved organizing women of diverse sex to come together to improve their livelihoods. As the national manager of the Women's Political School Project under the Ministry of Women Development, she trained over 25,000 elected women leaders to support their political engagement. She also formed the largest reproductive health workers network in the private sector to provide services in reproductive health, linking over 3,000 paramedics to reach 2 million women. Through her leadership of Sisters Trust Pakistan, Hashmi has worked tirelessly to help victims of domestic violence and women and girls breaking free of religious fundamentalism and forced marriages. And we are so honored to host Rehana Hashmi as our activist in residence here at Carleton's Law and Legal Studies Department.
Thank you.
Professor Chinnaiah Jangam is an associate professor in the Department of History here at Carleton. He holds an MA in history from the University of Hyderabad, an MPhil in modern Indian history from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. He was awarded the Felix Fellowship and Harry Frank Guggenheim Dissertation Fellowship for doctoral studies. Dr. Jangam was a postdoctoral fellow at the International Center for Advanced Studies, New York University. His research focus is on the social and intellectual history of Dalits in modern South Asia. His first book, Dalits and the Making of Modern India, was published by Oxford University Press in 2017. In his book, Jangam presents Dalit perspectives on nationalism and argues that Dalits were equal participants in the imagination and the politics of the formation of independent India. Dalits argued for the abolition of untouchability and the ending of caste inequality with its accompanying humiliations as preconditions for independence. Dalits imagined a nation founded on principles of justice, liberty, equality, and human dignity. These eventually became the foundational principles of the Indian Constitution drafted under the guidance of B.R. Ambedkar, a Dalit. So, Rehana, I'll invite you to start our interview, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Omni and Professor Jangam. I am honored also, and I am really touched by the work which Professor Jangam has been doing, and especially in this uncharted waters in India and all over the world. Thank you very much, Dr. Jangam, for agreeing for this interview. This interview would be not typically like asking one question. We are asking Dr. Jangam about your life as a child, your life as an adult, your child. So tell us, start from your childhood. How was your childhood? Any role models? Can you just say how Professor Jangam was?
About my childhood, as we said, as I emphasized, it is very important to, share our shared histories and shared struggles. So in this context, I think, to begin with my childhood, and I come from a very small village in, from Telangana state of India now. Basically, it was a formerly ruled by Nizam of Hyderabad. And historically, because, it was under the Nizam's rule, and also because it was not part of British India. So our histories are very, very different, and especially access to education and modernity. These are all kind of late entrants into our regions. So in this context, the region where I come from, it's like very rural and also very, especially on the eve of India's independence, it witnessed a lot of violence, especially in the context of, the Razakars and others. And my childhood is kind of, because I come from this untouchable family, the caste profession of our caste particularly very late into 1960s and 70s, was mostly, still kind of we called beggar system. It's like kind of bonded labor system. So in that context, my ancestors, including my grandmother, grandfather, all across, they all were bonded laborers, and assigned to landlord families as bonded laborers. So in this context, like because of the independence, and also because government of India had this idea of emancipation of Dalits, was a very important project because of the constitutional provisions. So they started this educational programs for rural, particularly Dalit children. And when I was growing up, like this was like when I was in 4 or 5, at the age of 4 or 5. So this going to school became a very important part of bringing this untouchable children into schools, became important mission of the government. So at that time when I was wanted to go to school, I was also employed as a bonded laborer to our landlord family. So I used to see their children going, and also most importantly, people at that time, particularly from untouchable background. So children, we are all excited that the government is calling us to come to schools, and that's how while working as bonded laborer, I started my schooling. So it started like that, and then what had happened after that, government also opened the social welfare hostels for students, particularly coming from untouchable backgrounds. These hostels are like boarding schools where we used to get free food and clothing, and that was a like getting 3 times meal for free was a very important attraction for us, because we come from so much poverty and deprivation. So that hostels really were important attractions for us, along with education, that you'll be fed freely. And this that's how I went to this nearest town in which this hostel used to be there. I think 10-15 kilometers. So we used to go there, and I went there and admitted myself for grade 4 and 5. Then that's how basically afterwards I went into this again. A government at that time started a different kind of um, competitive residential schools, which are called social for residential schools, and which again from grade 8th to 10th I studied in they have this exams. So they have these exams, they select students by conducting competitive exams. So I got selected, and then I went into this residential school, which was like it's not like Canadian residential school. They're very, very different. Like indigenous to children here in Canada were stolen, but in India, the residential schools for Dalits were like we chose voluntarily, because they are like kind of pathway to escape from the poverty and bonded laborness and also caste discrimination.
Yeah.
So like
Dr. Jangam, like you said about that when you left for this hostel boarding school, and you were at that time, same time you were, your family was bonded labor.
Yeah, bonded.
And who motivated you? How you went? Your mother, father?
Oh, my mother basically, because my mother is a very interesting lady, like despite poverty, everything, because she had this unique ambition of sending me to school. And also I also wanted, because she showed interest. And in fact, I remember when I wanted to go to school, when she took me to school to admit, one of the important problem, because my mother was a single mother, she doesn't have husband. And in school register, you're supposed to tell your father's name. I don't have a father. That was a major problem she faced, and like it's kind of humiliation sort of thing for her. But despite all that, she didn't desist. So in fact, she gave one of my uncle's name as my father's name, which I still carry. His name is my father's name, to make sure that I get admitted into school. So my mother always wanted me to study. And also I also, like, because my mother was motivated to send me to school, I also wanted to escape from this village bondedness, and somehow because the unique life which we come from, that made me to know the only way I can seek emancipation is through education.
So can you talk about what politicized you? Was there one specific experience that really opened your eyes, or was it just a combination of experiences of oppression?
Yeah, like one thing is that the politicization is like especially for a Dalit, like, in India, if you're coming from rural background and particularly from the area where I come from, Telangana region, and where, the feudal bonded oppression was very, um, really intense. And what happens is that, the very survival is a political survival. There's nothing called self. Like, that's one of the reasons why when we went into the social for schools and residential school hostels, one of the important thing we learned as children is that, like we start like the mere idea of getting into school itself is a challenge for us. So no one has to teach you that, this is political and this is not political, because the very idea of you entering into education itself becomes a very political thing, because, it goes against everything you are assigned as an untouchable in life. And that's why by the time I started going to school, one of the important development in our region is that, Maoist movement was picking up, particularly and also the Ambedkarite movement. In fact, Maoists in our area started coming and organizing and in the name of Ambedkarite, clubs. Ambedkar was like the person who drafted the constitution and first Dalit. And Ambedkar was the biggest inspiration for us. So in this context, what you see that we used to listen to, know about the stories from our, elders and also, common peers, and also this is the time in which I think there is an awakening among Dalits, both young and old, and about their rights and also about what is happening around. So in this context, what you see is that, we like, very idea that, we want to get into education itself is a very important turning point. And I think that really was like, it's a kind of both personal and also political. So because, it's not that, discrimination ends at one place once you, escape. So it is inescapable forever. That's why, caste is a very, insidious institution which continues. It never leaves you.
It's just by going to school, that was a political act of resistance and survival.
Yeah.
So what motivated you to then take the next step to become an active human rights advocate for Dalit liberation in your schooling and in your research?
That's what, like, one thing is that, as Dalits, especially even in college and universities, one of the important thing is that, part of our education process is not just about getting degrees. It's also about understanding what is happening to our people. Like, even when we were, like I remember when I was in undergraduate second year, there was a massive, big massacre of Dalits in nearby town. I remember we asked in a hostel, we all went onto road and started protesting, and we took out this rally in this town. They were very shocked that, these young children, what are they doing? Like, so, but that's what, like, you are aware, like, the moment you step into every level of your education, what happens is that, in particularly in Indian context, like, the moment you're out of school, you enter into college. In fact, every step of the way, caste is like, your shadow. It tries to, what it does is that, it tries to break you at various levels. So the only way is that, you have to face this reality at every stage. That's what, like, as students, like, one of the important ways in which that, like, when we went into colleges or universities, we used to look for each other. Who is our people? Is there any support system? So that's how basically we used to have this networks of friends, and and it doesn't mean that we did not have upper caste friends. There, in fact, we had very nice upper caste friends who are liberals, and teachers, particularly upper caste teachers, who are understanding and also who encouraged us and who used to sympathize with our lives. Like, it's not that, there is this complete black and white relationship between upper caste and Dalits. There, in fact, teachers were very interesting, even if they're upper caste or Brahmins or whatever. They were very liberal and understanding, and they used to appreciate our hard work. And so, like, it's part of our, very idea of, as I said in the beginning, that, very act of getting educated itself becomes a very important challenge for status quo.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I think it makes us, important, that, we have to wage struggles at every level, from classroom to, streets and everyday oppression in villages. It comes across.
Yeah. Dr. Jangam, you just mentioned about when there was a massacre in the village when you were studying. How old were you, and whether that was the your protest and going in the streets was a success, or whether it was like a setback to your community?
For example, the incident I'm talking about is like it was in 1992. It's called Chundur massacre. Like now I was in my undergraduate second year. I still remember, the incident happened like, I think it was some 25-30 kilometers from the place where I was studying. So like, I was like, in my teenage years, like not 17, 18, and I knew what happened. And basically that's when, some of our, that by that time I'm very active in student politics too, in undergraduate time. So like some of our friends, we got together and we went into the local Dalit neighborhood, and we just, we went and told them that this is what happened. We must come out and do something. I remember all night we sat and we collected people, and then, next day we thought we'll go around the town and do the protest. So we staged very big protest and went around the whole afternoon, and even our teachers and other friends also joined us. So we raised slogans. So one of the important lesson is that, for us is that, this even now it happens. It's not that, it happened sometime in 1992 and it went. No, it's not like that. There is everyday violence against Dalits. So that's one of the important things, like, today, like, for example, being a Muslim or being a Dalit in India is a life and death situation for you. Like, because that's where you have to realize that, you are under constant watch or vigilance. Like, it's like being a black in America. Like you when you are out of house, you don't know what happens, sort of situation. So like caste humiliation and violence is an everyday phenomena, because if you're assertive and tries to assert your dignity, and you don't have to do anything. Even if you like, that's what, like, my grandmother and I used to see as a child in my village, that, to be attacked by upper caste, our people don't have to do any crime. Just even if they wear shoes, slippers, and walk on the road, that is a crime, considered a crime. Like, that's why I remember I used to puzzle, like, whenever I used to go with my grandmother in village, the moment we used to go near the upper caste houses, she used to take out her slippers and hide in her sari. Because, the upper caste won't see it, because, if they feel offended if she wears sari. And I used to say, why are you doing this? It's very hot and everything. She used to say, no problem. I will walk till there. And, they never used to, explain, in the sense because they knew that, even telling me that this is what, like, they used to tell that, they don't, upper caste people won't feel comfortable, and, it might result in violence and all those things. But, that we used to accept it as, that is our life situation. That's why, you don't have to do a crime. Like, wearing a clean white shirt is also a crime, considered a crime. And that's why it's very interesting. This is what you learn as a Dalit in India. Like, your existence and your aspiration. You don't have to do, like, a crime or to be doing something. Just mere aspiration to behave like a normal human being can end you in trouble. Like, that's what, like, in colleges and schools, that's what even today in India, that is the biggest problem. Like, every day you hear, like, Dalit family getting prevented from, walking on the main streets of the village and entering into, cinema theaters. You pay for your own ticket and you are not allowed to sit many times.
And
These
what
are
is
all,
the population of Dalits in India? What is
it's,
the...
you will be very surprised. 250 million people are Dalits in India.
Oh,
That's more than almost 20% of India's population are
Wow.
considered Dalits.
oh,
250 millions.
oh,
Like,
it's more than Pakistan's population.
not more. Combine many countries together. Canada 35 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Canadian 35 million, they're not even half of what Dalit population in India. So
Wow.
that many people experience indignity day by day in their existence. That's why when I tell my students that, they can't fathom this reality that there are 250 million people in India, every day gets humiliated. They're, like, according to National Crime Records Bureau of India, it's government of official records, every day 10 Dalit women get raped. Every day.
Tell us about the struggle now of Dalit liberation in India. What are the how are people mobilizing? How are people fighting against this kind of oppression and dehumanization?
Yeah, that's what it's one, like, in this bleak situation, one of the important thing, which really drives me is that looking at these young people and, people in villages who are illiterate and uneducated, they're fighting. And, that's what is interesting. Like this whole idea that, there's so much violence exists in India. That doesn't mean that people are sitting and, quietly and, acquiescing the violence of the upper caste. There is a active resistance from, different levels. Like, if you look at, everyday papers and also like social movements and political organizing, everything, you see that across India, people are basically always waging wars against inhumanity and dehumanization. And it is that, I think, which inspire people like us. Like, we escaped from that, drudgery, and we are in privileged situation. People like me, feel very, motivated and also feel doubly responsible because, I'm in a privileged situation and I must contribute whatever the way I can in terms of, to the struggles of the people on the ground who are basically, they are struggling without even having anything. They are trying to protect the dignity and also take forward these struggles.
In that vein, there's been a rise of scholarship on Dalit studies and the Dalit Studies Center and different theoretical approaches like anti-caste epistemology. Can you talk a little bit about the rise of awareness and scholarship and centers that focus Dalit perspectives?
Yeah, yeah, thank you for this question, Omni. And yes, it's part of this larger, struggles of Dalits. Like one of the important things, like, till 1990, government of India, as I said, a state took the responsibility of education of Dalits, especially in rural areas and across India, and also implementation of affirmative action policies, particularly the in the government employment and educational institutions, that, certain percentage of seats and also jobs should be reserved for, people coming from deprived castes. That is an important motivator. By 1990, what you're seeing is that, across India, this first generation educated Dalits have entered into different institutions, taking from universities, colleges, government, employment. What you see that, these generations, when we entered, like in fact, when I entered, like when I was doing my masters and MPhil, one of the important things we used to see that, we never read a Dalit text as students. Like that's what, like when I went into my MA, like in fact, having conversations with teachers and friends, one of the important things we used to see that, how come there are no Dalits in any of the history texts we read?
Mm.
I remember one teacher when I asked that, how come there are no Dalits in NF of the text we are reading about, what did they do? So in fact, one of the teachers told me that, why don't you write? It is your responsibility. If you really think there is a lack, and it is your responsibility to write about them. In fact, that was the motivation for me. In fact, I was supposed to become a bureaucrat. That was the aspiration of every intelligent student in India, that, you know, you get into, do your undergrad and masters, and while doing your masters, you know, you write the civil service exam and become bureaucrat, and that's like your lifetime achievement. But, you know, I remember when I wanted to, like everyone used to think, all my friends from undergraduation and masters, that I will become a bureaucrat. But, you know, I chose this path of becoming academic, and, you know, everyone used to get surprised. Why are you doing this? Because one thing is that, you know, it's devalued academic profession. Second thing is that I'm pursuing history, that too, not even, you know, economics or some, you know, field in which you make a lot of money and all those things. I'm pursuing history. They used to think, my God, this guy is crazy. So, but, you know, one of the important thing is that, you know, going to university, it made me realize that, you know, if my people are not represented in history writing, I must have a responsibility to produce that.
Yes.
And this is what our generation and generation before us, when we entered into universities, one of the important things we wanted to look at is that, you know, critique the existing scholarship, both historical, social sciences, and humanities. And in fact, when I was in MA, one of the important thing, in fact, in Telugu literature at University of Hyderabad, in fact, our generation produced fascinating Dalit literary texts. Dalit literature become a very, very important, you know, genre which challenged the dominant narratives, dominant poetry, dominant novel. These are all, you know, very fluorescence of this Dalit writing was very important part of these things. So one of the things we try to do both as students and also as scholars is that, you know, critique the dominant narratives, point out the lacking of Dalit voice in existing scholarship, and articulate our aspirations and what actually write about our struggles, and I know what we have contributed to making up this, you know, literature and social science scholarship. So that's why, you know, you see that, you know, that 90s onwards, you see this very interesting, you know, idea that, you know, Dalit intervention became a very important, you know, aspect in social sciences and also humanities. That's when, you know, Dalits became important, you know, people who have started altering the very idea of genre of, you know, history, genre of writing, genre of various aspects.
We are currently in a very difficult political position in India right now. So how do you manage to do this work, and how do Dalit liberation groups manage to keep struggling under the current political climate?
Yeah, like one thing is that, you know, the more oppression you experience, the more humiliation you experience. I think, you know, the only way you think that to fight, you know, to overcome is to fight back. And like that's what, like, you know, like in the last 5-6 years, particularly after the Hindu right came to power in India, one of the important thing is that, you know, it is trying its level best to suppress and, you know, also, you know, impose the version of Hindutva on every community. And in this as in its aspirations, you know, like particularly the Hindu right is trying to rewrite the textbooks, and also it is unleashed, you know, lot of violence against Muslims, because Muslims don't fall into their narrative of what you call this Hindu India, and their Muslim is always seen as an outsider. The second community, which is at receiving end with the Hindu right, is the Dalits, because we don't, you know, as Dalits, we know that, you know, the very idea of accepting Brahmanical Hinduism is like accepting your oppression. So Dalit always becomes a very important problem figure in the idea of Hindu India, because we ask where we are, because we are not even considered as part of the Hinduism, but we are expected to consume this idea that we are Hindus. So that's why Dalit is always seen as a problem. And in this context, what you're seeing is that in last 4-5 years, it is Dalits and Muslims who are attacked on the roads in the name of beef, and also in the name of cow protection. And, you know, majority, you know, if the after Muslim, next the target is a Dalit. That's why, you know, what you see that the pattern of political developments in India, you see that, you know, last 5 years or 6 years of situation after Modi came to power is that, you know, like there is a systematic implementation of violence, state-sponsored violence, particularly the way the issues are picked up, the way issues are projected. Like 2016 onwards, you see that Dalit Muslim, and in last year it was Kashmir.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like like the way, like it's systematic, like that's why like it's so scary, precisely because it's a fascist state, precisely because of that. Things are not happening randomly, that these crazy people are coming to roads and killing. No, it's not that. Like state is complicit in this violence, because an upper caste man, if he rapes a Dalit woman or rapes a Muslim girl, he knows that he will not be punished. That's why in Kashmir, the uh, very young girl was raped by this uh, old Hindu priest. No, the girl was like not age of his granddaughter.
Yeah.
Like same thing, what happened a few months back in Hathras, 19-year-old Dalit girl, 4 upper caste men. Like what you see that they know that this caste Hindus, the state is with them. So this systematic violence is happening. And second thing is that state also, like in last 2-3 years, one of the important development is that activists, rights activists, particularly Dalits and also intellectuals and women, journalists, lawyers, Muslims, they were all getting arrested on these sedition charges, saying that they're all conspiring against the state. But these are all very valued intellectuals, lawyers, like human rights lawyers, and Sudha Bharadwaj, who was fighting for indigenous communities, or Dalit activists, like people like N. Sai Baba, a 70% physically challenged man. He basically uses wheelchair. He was arrested under the charges of sedition. Can you imagine a person who is can't even walk, he's been arrested on sedition charges? And like lot of them, like people, very young people, like Umar Khalid, a university student who did PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, very young guy, and who affirms his faith in constitution and also non-violent struggles. He was arrested. Now he's in jail. So what you see is that this spurious charges state is creating, and trying to jail people and intimidate them. But what you see is that that doesn't mean that people are deterring. Like every day, young India is speaking against it, and a lot of courageous people. That's what, like, I feel many times that we live in a most privileged country in the world. We can sit here and talk, and we can sleep without worry that no one will knock our door.
Yeah.
But though they are the people who are fighting in that context. That's why I think like across the world, one of the important thing in the last 2-3 years as Dalits, what we are doing is that we are raising our voice wherever we are, that we are there with the people who are on the streets and fighting for dignity and rights of the people.
As you know, my origins are Muslim Indian, so I'm really excited to learn more about the alliance between Dalit and Muslim struggles. Can you talk a little bit more about these kinds of alliances across differences, both in India and outside of India?
One of the important things, like last Hindu right, the rise of Hindu right and attacks on Muslims and Dalits, one of the important realization it made, particularly both Dalit and Muslim communities in India, is that unless we are together, we cannot take on this fascist regime. And I think that's one of the reasons why, and not only even before coming up this thing, one of the important thing is that there is a natural alliance between Dalits and Muslims, because one of the important thing, like even as a child, I remember the only people with whom we could freely interact were Muslims. This whole idea that Hinduizing Dalits is an agenda which started only after RSS started using this as a political weapon. But if in villages, I remember, like that's what one of the things is that, the only communities to whom we could freely interact were Muslims. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like in Uttar Pradesh, for example, when Bahujan Samaj Party experimented this whole idea that Bahujan community, like Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims as together as a community, and they were able to really challenge the political power of the Hindutva. So I think political experiments were also made, but what in the last 5 years, what had happened that because Hindutva has threw us into existential crisis. I think Dalit Muslims particularly have come forward, and they are on the same platform, particularly in Hyderabad and even in Uttar Pradesh. Like in fact, the Beam Army, if you might be familiar or not, like Chandrasekhar Azad, who is organizing Dalits in India. And in fact, when this CAA, anti-CAA and NRC protests were happening, the this Chandrasekhar Azad, Dalit leader, very young Dalit leader, was in Makkah Masjid, Jama Masjid in Delhi, and he was basically coming out of Masjid and trying to form this Dalit Muslim alliance. And in fact, last week, with this weekend, Saturday, when we organized this webinar and vigil for Hathras victim, one of the important person who was speaking on our platform was Muhammad Pracha, who was basically Supreme Court, Supreme Court lawyer, and also who is basically fighting for the Dalit victims. So we have this. One thing is that this Hindu fascism really made us come together to at least as a battle of survival. So coming forward into the context of India, like coming out of India, one of the important thing is that we also realize being here that because Hindutva is very well organized network, especially across North America. In fact, a lot of work.
Tell us what is Hindutva, because most of the people don't know what is. Can you just explain what is Hindutva?
Basically, Hindutva is like a political ideology. It's a political philosophy developed by this Golwalkar. He is a Hindu right thinker who was part of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Basically, this whole idea of imagination of Hindu India. And one of the important thing is that he talks about karma bhumi, dharma bhumi. Like basically, for him, the religions which are not born on the Indian soil were foreigners. If you practice any religion which is not part of Indian soil, like other than Buddhism, Hinduism, like if you're a Christian or a Muslim, you're an outsider. So his imagination is that this whole idea that politicization, like using religious identity and also religious imagination as a political idea, starts with this MS Golwalkar's idea of bunch of thoughts. He wrote about that in his text, and they believe that anyone who doesn't abide, accept Hinduism and basically the religion which is not born, in the soil of India, were considered foreigners. And then what happens is that if you don't accept their version of Hindutva, so anyone who is opposed to them is considered an outsider. That's what one of the things the government of India tries to do. Like criticism of government, they think criticism of nation. They don't, what they try to do is they combine both. Like if you say anything against Modi, it means you're making statement against India. So what happened that this particularly the upper caste, the early people who migrated out of India and particularly to North America and Europe were all these Brahmins and other upper castes. And especially 1950s and 60s onwards when they came to these countries. So one of the ways in which they try to create their own communities is through temple networks. Across North America, you see that even in Europe, constructing Hindu temples was a big symbol of this cultural politics of Indian diaspora, where that's when you whole idea that this Hindu godmen, particularly this Hare Krishna mission and all these things, part of this larger network of creating this community of Hindus in North America. But you look at the social history of these people, they all come from Brahmin and upper caste backgrounds. And these are the people who marketed yoga as a very important cultural, PR network, public relations, campaign is that yoga and vegetarianism. And afterwards, after 90s, it is Bollywood. Bollywood dance and all these things. So there is a systematic effort basically, because one thing is that because these are all upper caste privileged people who migrated with higher education, and they all came into good professions like engineers, doctors, bankers and investment, like you, because of their caste privilege, they are also able to niche themselves as this model minority. Unlike any other immigrant communities, Indians look very successful, highly educated and sophisticated because caste privilege aligns with their educational and racial privilege. So that's why the kind of politics they do in North America or in Britain are very different from any other minorities, because they come from this caste privilege and also caste contempt. Contempt precisely because they have contempt towards dark skin, they have contempt towards poor people. So it will not be a surprise an upper caste Hindu aligns with the Republican Party. Republican Hindus are there in US precisely because it aligns very well with their caste, class and also racial privilege. So these networks, when we see in India, particularly in North America, that these networks, like upper caste networks or temples and also various institutions, they are the one basically who provided legitimacy for Modi. Because of the 2002 Gujarat riots in which thousands of Muslims were butchered, Modi was not allowed to enter into any country. He was denied visa to come to America, Canada, Britain, all these countries. But who are the people who campaigned for his legitimacy? Were these non-resident Indians, mostly upper caste men, who are basically campaigning and making PR networks, and they are the one who are hosting Modi when he became prime minister in Times Square in London, in the US and also in Toronto, wherever he went. These are the people. The irony is that they don't even have Indian citizenship. None of them hold Indian citizenship. All these people who talk about Modi and Hindutva sitting in North America, they are not even Indian citizens. And that's why we realized, particularly after Modi came to power, one of the important things is that how do we counter this right-wing campaign, particularly in the name of cultural politics, in the name of this religion, which is supposed to be non-violent and peace and loving, this false image myth they spread. How do we counter? So that's one of the reasons why I started writing very actively, and also then I connected with this Canadian Council for Indian Muslims, an organization. I remember 2 years back, they invited me to deliver a lecture to their annual conference. So then, one thing is that, whether I had a community or not, I never, I always made it a point to speak against Hindu right. So I think that's one of the reasons why I was able to connect with Indo-Canadian Muslim community, and now basically we are actively working together and and doing particularly in last 2 years we are organizing a lot of activities and also lectures and trying to educate particularly non-Indians, particularly Canadians, about what actually is happening in India against Muslims and Dalits and also lower castes.
And also just about Kashmir, like now with the, it was, you talked when we were discussing before. So can you tell us that now with the Modi's invasion of Kashmir, like annexing with India, so can you tell about that? What is the implication, long-term implications for India internationally?
Yeah, that's one thing, like Kashmir, it's annexation of Kashmir was not a new thing, happened under Modi. Kashmir was always one of the highly militarized zone in the world after Palestine, I think.
Yeah.
Throughout the history of post-independent India, even 80s and 90s. What had happened that Kashmir is always under heavily militarized, and Kashmiris are always controlled with force. But the difference between what Modi has done and the Modi regime's what he did in 2019 August, how is it different from previous times is that like in previous regimes, despite having heavy military presence and killings of Kashmiris and all those things happening under the Indian armed forces, one of the important thing is that we had this special constitutional provision called 370, Article 370, which actually is like had given this autonomous status to Jammu and Kashmir because of its special historical situation, and also because that's the only Muslim majority region in India. So it enjoyed this so-called constitutional privilege of being protected from the outside incursions, and also the cultural privileges of maintaining its autonomy. So what the Hindutva, like what had happened that this campaign by the Hindu right against Kashmir, Article 370, is not new. It started somewhere in 1990s onward. The very foundation of BJP and Jan Sangh and all these Hindu right forces. One of the ways in which they try to, if you look at their manifestos, various election manifestos from 1990s onwards, abolition of 370 was part of their game, political game. But what had happened that till Modi came to power, no one did. One thing is that the Hindu right never got full majority on its own. Like 2 terms of Vajpayee, who was prime minister on behalf of BJP, though he was Hindu right, but that time also he formed government with the outside support of so-called secular parties.
Yeah.
So they never had parliamentary majority to abolish this special privilege for special constitutional provision of 370 for Kashmir.
Yeah.
But what Modi did is that by abolishing this, one of the important thing is that whatever the constitutional protections Kashmiris had in terms of their safeguarding their cultural political rights, they have been stripped off. So now in fact what happens is that in fact by doing that he's making the country, is basically pushed Kashmiris into like life and death situation, like to exist as a Kashmiri now as a citizen and also as a person, is that you either you have to choose between subservient position as a citizen without any rights, like you become a subject citizen, not a citizen. And now what you see is that in this context, what you see, like this is, as I said in the beginning, it is part of the larger game of Hindutva, where basically erase any sort of autonomous identities, either it's Muslims, Dalits, or Christians. Like it's part of that. Like why is it that it, in realistic terms, it doesn't make much difference whether what he has done in terms of what actually Kashmiris are suffering through. But symbolically, what it does is that it strips them of any sort of rights or claims over the constitution.
I was going to ask about doing the two roles of, you're both an academic and an activist, and how does it, to negotiate these two roles, do you sometimes feel pulled in different directions?
It is a difficult job in the sense, one thing is that many times because of the caste stigma and because there's so much, because in interacting with Indian diaspora here, because we're 80 to 90% of them come from upper caste backgrounds. Many times identifying yourself as a Dalit is one really needs a courage. I know a lot of Dalits here, both in America and Canada, who do not want to come out as a Dalit because they think you will be stigmatized and you will be mistreated, sort of thing. So but one thing is that I'm an academic, and most importantly I'm a very politicized academic. So I made it a point that my achievement, my whatever I do should become a role model to people of my community and others who want to advocate for social justice and and equality. So in this context, it's a conscious, because one thing is that what I write needs to have meaning in terms of what happens on the ground. So I see my what I'm doing, like both as an academic and even in classroom, I actively talk about my research and also my activism and what I do, because that's the only way I can educate people and also spread message about my community and my histories. So in this context, I see that they are not diverse. Like I don't want to see that they are different, but actually, though it's a very difficult journey to make, but I consciously chose that my writings should speak the way I talk and the way I involve in community. And that's why I write on Dalits precisely, because it is not just a career. It's basically it's a larger emancipatory struggle on which I am basically every day engaged. So like tenure and promotion, these are all they're all part of my career development, but that career would not have been meaningful but for what where I come from. So, and if I really want to make it meaningful, I must make it speak both ways, both as an activist and also as an academist. Only in Delhi there is one center for Dalit studies, which basically headed by this very famous Dalit academic again, Professor. He was a former chairman of UGC. So that is in Delhi. It's an autonomous research institute. But now I think Dalit studies. In fact, there was a first international Dalit studies conference held in 2008 at University of Pennsylvania. And after that conference, the friends who basically organized published this first volume by Duke University Press called Dalit Studies.
Okay.
I think that is the beginning of a new initiative, particularly internationally, to foreground Dalit studies as a alternative to the mainstream South Asian scholarship.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you about a project you're working on, which is a memoir of your mother's life. Can you tell us more about what you're hoping to accomplish and about using memoir as a genre as part of your work?
Yeah, like this again, because after I moved to United States, one of the important thing I learned as a scholar, historian particularly, is that the African American life narratives have really inspired me a lot. Like life narrative as a genre is a very important genre, precisely because it acts as a testimony for historical oppression. The second thing what it does is that life narrative also has a possibility to change the heart of the other, basically the person who is not a Dalit or who is not a black. When you read about the stories of suffering, one of the things, it humanizes the other. That's one of the reasons why I think especially women's biographies or autobiographies, or black autobiographies, or even Dalit, or like why are they important is that the possibility of acting as a testimony and also possibility of changing the hearts of the others. So in this context, Dalit life narratives, particularly 1990s onwards, is a very important genre emerged in India. And in that context, what we see is that by writing these stories, we are basically paying a way for the historical documentation. The second thing is that we are also telling the stories of our suffering, not to gain sympathy, but use them as a liberation stories. Like despite oppression, despite poverty and squalor in which you are trapped in, you always look for possibilities to escape from them. I think like I wanted to write my mother's story precisely because of that, because as I said in the beginning that she is the one basically who had this aspiration to send me to school. And also my mother's life was a unique life precisely because she was dedicated to this local temple in our village. Like so, and she was basically called Jogini, the lady who was married to this goddess. And that means they don't have husbands. And so in that context they are exploited many times, and their children do not have father. And it had a lot of burden in terms of being a single mother and raising a child without a father, and facing all sorts of both sexual violence and also caste discrimination. And despite all that she never let me stop my, my studies. And she always used to tell me that, you should run without looking back. If you look back, you have nothing. So your only thing is that, the only way you can do something in life is that, you run with your life and never look back. And that's what I used to get surprised, like, I never looked back at my life in literal terms also. Because despite, though I lost my mother when I was in my 9th grade, so very early, so I had to struggle myself to educate and go to universities, everything. But one of the lessons I learned from my mother's words is that, never look back.
Yeah.
And that, I think, now I feel that, those words are like very courageous. I know many of my relatives, friends with whom I studied, despite having everything, none of them pursued studies. But here is my mother, not having anything, made it a point that, I should study, and that's the only way I can liberate myself and my family. So that's why, I want to tell my story of my mother, because, otherwise, if I don't tell, there's no way that, our story will come out.
And when this book is going to come?
I don't know. I'm still writing. Like, I finished two chapters. So it's really, heavy to write. Like,
Yeah, I understand. It's
yeah.
really hard if you are writing yourself.
Yeah, writing myself, and
Really,
most importantly, you have to go back and relive those, hard times in life.
yes.
So now, those are all good memories now for me. Like, that is what made me what I am today. But many times what happens is that, it's to recollecting them is like many times it really destabilizes me many times. But, it also empowers me.
Yeah,
The
I
sense,
remember, yeah, when um, I was under threat and I was trying to write, I asked my daughter to write I want to really write about my mother and my story, but it was very hard for me to even narrate. And I really, you are courageous and you are doing it. It's amazing.
thank you.
It's amazing. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
coming
Thank you.
back to your work as an activist, as a professor, it is most of the time it's really very hard. Tell us about your family or how you take care of yourself, because it's very difficult, because most of the time there are setbacks, it's hard. So tell us about your family and how you cope with tension, how you really keep yourself motivated.
Yeah, like, as African American thinker Audra Lorde, she says very interesting. Self-care is political. Like, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't do politics. And that's one thing. But I'm very fortunate, like, in many ways, though I had a very hard life and I struggled a lot. But I have a very nice family. My wife, basically, whom I met in JNU. So basically, she's very, very not just supportive. Yeah, I always tell people that, I am today what I am today because of my wife, and she basically shares my, aspirations. And, she's, that way, I'm very lucky. Like, though she comes from, we are intercaste marriage and, all those things. But, one thing is that, I'm lucky in finding a person who could really share my, aspirations and my struggles and understand them. So that way, I have a very um, lucky partner, with whom I share. And I have a son who is 15 now, he's in grade 10, who is actually, again, he's very passionate about this social justice issues, and I take him to protest whenever I organize. So we have constant discussions. So he knows about everything is happening in India, and also Dalits and Muslims. So in fact, he also learns, he can speak, reads Arabic. So, like, he has this very interesting interest for him, because of our own lives, everything. So, and another interesting thing is because I studied in hostels most of the time. So I'm very systematic about, in the sense, I make it a point to take care of myself. Like, I run, I make it a point to go for walks and runs, and And so yeah, I try to enjoy, like, because one thing is that, I value what I have, both in terms of life, career, and also time. And I take this every moment of life with lot of, appreciation and also gratefulness. And that's why, I make,
We have to run because, most of the time when we are in rallies or on a protest,
yeah,
police comes after us, so we have to be fit to
yeah,
run.
yeah. That's
Yes.
what, I remember, that's what we used to do in Delhi. Like I remember once we went to this protest in Delhi, we were in JNU at that time, in front of this AP Bhavan, because so we were all standing, like, protesting and everything. Police were chasing. I
Yeah.
had this very good friend who's again left activist, and then he said, when they are running, just we should go to bus stop and pretend we are looking for a bus. And that was a brilliant idea. All the people were running, and this fellow behaved as though, looking for a bus, and the Lati policeman came and, what are you doing here? He said, we are waiting for a bus for Connaught Place.
Okay.
And he left us. Like, you need to be very, these are all, that's why, like, India, that way, it really teaches you a lot, especially survival. Like,
Yeah, as a man, I understand it's good. You can, as a woman, even in India or in Pakistan, tell us about that. How you feel like even running for in the protests,
yeah.
it's not easy. And being an activist and women activist, how you feel and how you really rate their courage.
Yeah, basically that again, I'm that way, I'm a privileged man. I must acknowledge, again, I really can't really fathom how difficult it is to be either a Muslim activist or a Dalit activist, and especially being a woman. And as you know, the sexual violence, like, one of the important problems, especially in our societies, South Asian societies, is that, women are always shamed for being assertive and being, active, being, one of the important ways in which they do is that, they character assassination.
Yes.
That's the beginning of, attacks on women's, especially active women's political life. And state brutality, again, is unbelievable. Like, police or, any institutional heads, they think, women are not supposed to be political.
Yes.
So, like, that's one of the things, like, like, but one thing, Rehana ji, like, it's unbelievable how this generation, young generation in India, so much hopeful, both men and particularly women.
Yeah.
And they are, dismantling all kinds of power structures in India, taking from sexual, violence to, institutional, this thing, especially after the Me Too movement.
Yes.
And women are really taking, like, it's unbelievable. This is like the most hopeful time. At one level, we see this, umbrella of Hindutva and Hindu
Yeah.
fascism, becoming, shade and under which you live. But at another level, you also see this, little, mushroom sprouting in the form of women's activism.
I
And,
always call them these are islands of hope.
yeah, not just islands. They're not islands. They are like, seas in which these people will be
One
drowned
day it
one
would
day.
be.
Yeah. Like,
Yes.
they're not, like, that's what I feel like, because so much hope. And, like, that's why whenever I want to get inspiration, I watch these videos, like, to understand, we tell ourselves that, we are so privileged. Even if we can't speak, there is no meaning for what we are doing.
Yes.
And that's what, like, it's very interesting, like, we live in this very interesting times in which, younger generations are going to change the course of human history, particularly in the context of South Asia.
Yes.
Can I ask, for a lot of people who are watching this interview, they may be learning about Dalit oppression for the first time. What can people do here in Canada to support the liberation movements?
Yeah, like, one thing, because you guys are outside, and because, you're not really, it doesn't come into your everyday social context. And, One of the ways in which me talking about Dalits and Dalit suffering and Dalit oppression and also Dalit liberation movements in India is that, the outsiders, the role of the outsiders is that talk about them. If you meet an Indian, particularly, Hindu, ask them about caste system, where they come from, what caste they come from, what do they think about, caste, and, what do they think about Dalits. And, if outsiders ask innocent people who don't have any idea, asking them, puzzles them and also disturb the privilege of the caste Hindus who live here and try to pretend that it doesn't exist. So the only way you can say that, that's how the racism or sexism, right? When you talk about them, you make it as a problem. Like, recognize that this problem exists. That's the beginning of what we call dialogue. When you recognize that, there is a problem, then what happens is that, we can have a dialogue for which, we can recognize each other's humanity. And at the end of the day, like, leave aside religions, races, and, sexes, everything. It is this essence of humanity which needs to be preserved. And every human being deserves a dignity. And it is not a crime to be born as a Muslim or a Dalit or a transgender or indigenous person. We don't choose our birth, but we can choose how we treat others and how we respect others. And that's why, the outside community, the only international community responsibility is to recognize this problem and engage, talk about these things. That, ask Indians, like, where is caste and what actually is happening, where do they stand. That I think is the beginning of, any sort of social transformation.